an environment, a political environment now, where even talk of challenging the status quo is considered by some people, you know, conspiring with terrorists even. We have Obama just signed the NDAA, which authorizes his indefinite detention of American citizens. Do you think there is an attempted backlash by the institutions and the status quo to try to marginalize any talk of real change? Is that an accurate assessment?
Absolutely, and I'm so glad that it's happening, because you know what? That tells us that we're winning. You don't get a backlash unless you're being successcul.
Yeah, you know, you're right on. They're afraid.
Yeah, they're afraid. The message is getting out there, and I hate to see people, kids and people of all ages, beaten over the head by batons from policemen, as we've seen sometimes in some of the Occupy movements. But you know what? Although I hate to see that, it tells us that they're getting desperate. When policemen go in and beat their own people over the head with batons, it's because they're desperate. We saw this during the Vietnam War, and it ultimately ended to the victory of the anti-Vietnam protesters and the end of the war. So this backlash is a really good sign, and it should strengthen all of us and make us realize that we are winning, and we're going to turn this thing around. We have to turn this thing around, and it's global. I was just recently in Istanbul and going back to the Middle East in a couple of months. I was in China recently, in Iceland, and I spent a lot of time in Latin America, in Europe, Asia. I travel around a lot in the United States, and I have to tell you, all over the world, there's a new consciousness that's rising up. There's a new awareness. You know, we do astrologically. We're entering the age of Aquarius in 2012, and 2012 is also the Mayan period, prophesized period of the opportunity for tremendous transformation. And in fact, we're feeling it now. We're feeling this new awareness. So I really think that we are in a time of extreme revolution, a beautiful revolution. It's bigger than the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, the American revolution. It's a revolution of consciousness, of people waking up. And it's a very exciting time. I'm so blessed. I feel so blessed to be part of this time.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, I agree with you. This is nothing really that new, John. I mean, from Eisenhower through to Kennedy, you could see how actual leaders of the United States wanted to warn us about everything that we're talking about today, that being a globalist or turning the economy into a global economy was going to be some sort of benefit, when in truth, the leaders of the United States were saying, you know, this is not a direction we should be going in at all. I mean, they knew this all the way back then, but now presidents of the United States since Kennedy seem to be, you know, falling for it hook, line, and sinker. But most individuals see that as we become more centralized, that things are being controlled by just a few entities, and individuals for that matter, that the lifestyle of people is not improving at all. And I agree with you, it's becoming less an intellectual conversation, and it's simply something that's being felt by people more and more. Times are not going the way they want. We've got to stop it, and we've got to start living very differently to care for one another much more than we are right now.
Oh, that's beautifully expressed. Yes, I totally agree with that. And, you know, I think it's really important for us to understand that for the first time in human history, every human being, every sentient being on this planet is facing the same crises. It used to be, you know, you'd have hurricanes in Florida and tsunamis in Asia and earthquakes in San Francisco. But they didn't have a lot of impact on any other parts of the world at the time. But today, every one of us across the planet is being faced by climate chaos. We know that, regardless of what you think is causing it, we know that the glaciers are melting. We know that the oceans are rising. We're all facing the crisis of overpopulation, of resources that are diminishing at accelerating rates, and prices of food and fuel and other essentials that are increasing at accelerating rates. Species extinction. We're all facing these crises together for the first time in human history, and for the first time we're all communicating with each other through the internet, through cell phones, through streaming. This program is a really good case in point. This is a revolutionary time, and we're also understanding that the only way my 4-year-old grandson, God bless him, can possibly hope to inherit a sustainable, just, peaceful, thriving world is if every human being, every sentient being on this planet inherits that same world. My grandson, growing up in the United States, cannot expect to have a decent, sane world unless every child growing up in Bolivia and Botswana and Indonesia and Palestine and Israel also grows up in that same world, a sustainable, just, peaceful world for everyone.
John, I wanted to ask if you would, just to change the subject, would you address your beliefs and interpretations on the Mayan calendar prophecies? Of course, some people have run with a little bit of information and taken it to maybe something that's not quite, doesn't have a basis in history, but you've spent a lot of time with the Shuar Indians in Ecuador. You and I talked about that in the past. And so you have some knowledge of of course, of the Inca, of the Mayans, of the Aztecs as well. What's your take on the Mayan calendar prophecies?
Well, yes, I know the Mayans well. I've been living and working with Mayan shamans since the 70s and continue to do so. In fact, I'm taking leading a trip down there in December of 2012 during the big date, December 21st. We'll be in sacred sites during sacred ceremony. I invite your listeners to join me. It'll be up on my website in February. It's not there yet because we're still in the process of finalizing the organization, but the trip will happen for sure.
Hey, John, that would be great if we could stream that live.
So, well, let's look into it. I'd love to do that. So, but we couldn't probably do the ceremony. Will be a sacred ceremony in the sacred, amazing site. And anyway, so I invite people to go to johnperkins.org and later in February and get all the details. And it won't be a very expensive trip. It'll be a very sacred, beautiful trip. But in any case, the Mayan prophecies tell us that 2012, December 21st, 2012 is a marker date, and some people dispute the date, but the date's not really all that important. The point is we're at this time in history that the Mayans for over 2,000 years have prophesied that this is a point of time for the opportunity of transformation, human transformation. And the clearest statement of that prophecy, I think, comes out of the Popol Vuh, which is their sacred text. And the Popol Vuh says that there was a leader whose name was Seven Macaw, and he was characterized by greed, by brutality, by exploitation, by extreme materialism. And he is killed, his head is severed by the hero twins, a boy and a girl, and replaced by Hunahpu, or one Hunahpu, a new ruler who's characterized by love, compassion, cooperation, spirituality. And the prophecies say that what this was really about is the replacement of the old epoch, everything that's come up until now, which is materialistic, which is greedy, which is brutal, and that the hero twins, men and women from around the world, must come together. It will not be the leaders. You know, the leaders themselves, like Seven Macaw, will not replace themselves. It has to come from the people who are represented here by these hero twins, and be replaced by a new era, a new epoch, which is characterized by cooperation, love, compassion, spirituality. And, you know, the eagle and the condor prophecy from the Andes, which says that the eagle and the condor will come together at this time, male and female, heart and mind, passion and industry, emotion and intellect will all come together. We have this opportunity. Now, all of these prophecies are telling us that we've entered this time. None of them is saying that it will actually happen. They're only saying that we have the potential, but we, the people, have to make it happen. And we have to recognize that it's not going to be our leaders. It's going to be us. We can bring in leaders that will help support this, but we can't look to the leaders to initiate it. We have to do it. And we're doing it. You know, we're seeing this in the Occupy movements. We're seeing this in the Arab Spring. We're seeing it in the huge revolution that swept Latin America. We're seeing it in what's going on in China today, and what's going on in the Soviet Union even, and in the former Soviet bloc countries. We're seeing it all over the world. People, it's happening. It is happening, and we need to keep pushing to make it happen harder and faster.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like your point is very clear and very well taken, John, that it's not about blaming these people. You know, it seems like the Wall Street message seems to be muddled a little bit, not to offend anybody, but the reality is when you hear that there are young people so frustrated and upset, they don't feel like they have opportunity, John. I'd like you to speak to this a little bit. They want a higher education, like somehow, again, not to disrespect anybody, but somehow like a higher education is going to guarantee you a success in life. And to blame institutions, to blame governments for not giving that person the opportunity to grow and to be something. I think that those Wall Street protesters are missing the point. Maybe you could speak a little bit, John, to what you wish would come out of the Wall Street protests. Like, what if you were the, for example, the spokesperson for the Wall Street protesters? You know, what would you like to see as that message? Is it about just dropping away the fear and getting towards helping one another and building businesses and communities that just understand those simple concepts?
Yeah, you know, well, first of all, I participated in a few of these Occupy movements, and I've been told actually that Confessions of an Economic Hitman is one of the field guides to this movement.
Great.
I'm really happy to see, you know, the way that people are speaking out and coming together and raising consciousness. And yes, I understand. I mean, I've been to some of these sites, and yes, there are some drug addicts there. There are homeless people who've just wandered in because they can get a free meal. But there's also a lot of amazing people who really are determined to turn things around, to turn the tide and create a better world for all of us. And, you know, like any movement, it has its rough spots. If you go back to the American Revolution, the Sons of Liberty, you know, were terribly despised by many people because they threw tea into Boston Harbor. They broke windows in the homes of Tories. They threw stones, and they were called the rabble. You know, so there's always rough spots. But everything has to begin someplace, and the beginning is often very rough and very crude, and that's what we've been seeing here. And now it's time to really refocus and to move into something more positive. I'm often reminded of. I think in many respects we're very much like the feudal system in Europe during the Middle Ages. Where you had a lord in the castle, and he had a number of knights working for him, a handful of them. And then outside the castle walls was everybody else, what we call the bourgeoisie. And these people were told they don't own the land. They said, you don't own the land, but you can use the land, but you can grow food on the land, but you've got to give 80% of it to the lord and his knights, or if you don't, you'll be pillaged and raped by the knights from the next castle. And then we had people come along as represented by Robin Hood. Whether Robin Hood was real or not doesn't matter. There was a tremendous uprising of people who said, we're not putting up with this any longer. And the famous Prince John from the Robin Hood tales became King John. When Richard the Lionhearted died, his brother Prince John became King John, and he actually was the one who signed the Magna Carta. So, in fact, the people, Robin Hood and the merry women and merry men, came along and they forced the king to sign a document that said no more arbitrary rule. And that began a long period, which was very slow to begin with, but it led up to the American Revolution and the French Revolution. And things were progressing, I think, along those lines up until World War II. But after World War II, things began to change again. And by the time that détente with Russia came along,